The sterile white walls of the courtroom seemed to press in, suffocating the very air. All eyes were on Julian Sterling, the handsome heir to a corporate empire, his face a mask of practiced grief. He spoke of his wife Amelia, painting her as an unstable, greedy woman trying to ruin him. He was the victim he claimed. But across the room, Amelia cradled her swollen belly, the ghost of a handprint still stinging her cheek in her memory. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the slap, the mistress, the betrayal. They saw a broken woman. They were about to see a queen reclaim her throne. The apartment was a monument to minimalist wealth, a sterile paradise of glass steel and Italian marble perched high above the glittering skyline of downtown Bristol. From their 42nd floor living room, the city lights below looked like a blanket of scattered diamonds. It was a view that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But for Amelia, it had become the backdrop to a profound and chilling loneliness. Her husband, Julian Sterling, was the architect of this life and the warden of her gilded cage. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry, the charismatic heir apparent to Sterling Enterprises, a multinational logistics conglomerate. He was impeccably dressed, disarmingly charming, and ruthlessly ambitious. He had swept Amelia off her feet 5 years ago, a quiet, talented art historian with a warm smile and a gentle heart. He had loved, or so he'd claimed, her calming presence, a stark contrast to his own high-stakes world. Now that calmness was something he merely tolerated. The warmth she offered was something he no longer seemed to need. Amelia traced the rim of her untouched glass of sparkling water, the tiny bubbles rising and popping in the silence. She was 5 months pregnant. The news, which should have been a joyous occasion, had been met with a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in Julian's eyes. Not joy, but perhaps inconvenience. "Another late night, darling?" she had asked a week ago, her voice soft, trying to keep the tremor of anxiety out of it. He had barely looked up from his phone, loosening his silk tie as he strode past her. "Big merger on the horizon, Ames. You know how it is. These things don't happen on a 9-to-5 schedule." It was always a merger, a deadline, a conference call with Tokyo. The excuses were as polished and expensive as his shoes, but Amelia wasn't naive. She saw the faint smudges of lipstick on his collars that the dry cleaner sometimes missed, smelled the cloying sweetness of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his suit jackets, and felt the cavernous distance that had opened up between them in their king-sized bed. Tonight was their anniversary. 5 years. A milestone that felt less like a celebration and more like a sentence. She had cooked his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops, with a saffron risotto. A single candle flickered in the center of their vast dining table, its tiny flame fighting a losing battle against the cold, recessed lighting. The click of the front door finally came just after 11. Julian entered not with a bouquet of flowers or a sheepish apologetic smile, but with a woman. Amelia froze her hand, hovering over the oven. The woman was stunning in a way that felt weaponized. She had sharp, intelligent eyes, a mane of raven-black hair, and a crimson dress that seemed poured onto her statuesque frame. She radiated a cold, predatory confidence that made Amelia feel instantly dowdy in her comfortable maternity dress. Amelia recognized her from a recent society magazine, Isabella Vance, a notoriously aggressive corporate lawyer often hired by Sterling Enterprises. "Julian." Amelia's voice was a whisper. Julian tossed his keys into a crystal bowl with a clatter, his expression unreadable. "Amelia, this is Isabella. We were just finalizing the preliminary framework for the Ashford deal. We got on a roll and I thought we could finish up here. The lie was so blatant, so disrespectful, it stole the air from Amelia's lungs. Isabella's eyes roamed the apartment, a look of dismissive appraisal on her face before they landed on Amelia, lingering for a moment on her pregnant belly, with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Nice place," Isabella said, her voice a low purr. "Very domestic." The insult veiled as it was landed like a punch. The word hung in the air, domestic, simple, unimportant. Everything Amelia had become. I made dinner," Amelia managed, gesturing towards the table. "For our anniversary." Julian finally had the decency to look uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Right. Our anniversary. Look, Ames, this is just terrible timing. This Ashford deal is critical." "The deal couldn't wait until morning," Amelia asked, her voice gaining a fragile edge of strength. "For one night, Julian. For us, don't be so dramatic." He snapped, his patience wearing thin. Isabella stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Julian's arm. It was a gesture of ownership, casual and confident. "Julian, darling, perhaps I should go. It seems your wife is feeling a bit emotional." She drew out the last word, loading it with condescension. The sight of that hand on her husband's arm, the possessive darling, the calculated jab at her pregnancy-fueled hormones, it was the final crack in the dam of Amelia's composure. "Get your hand off my husband," Amelia said, her voice low and shaking with a fury she didn't know she possessed. Isabella raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Amelia said, taking a step forward. "This is my home. You are not welcome here. Leave." Julian's face darkened. "Amelia, that's enough. You're making a scene. Apologize to Isabella." "Apologize?" Amelia laughed, a broken, incredulous sound. "You bring your colleague," she spat the word, "into our home on our anniversary, and you want me to apologize? Are you out of your mind?" "I said that's enough." Julian's voice boomed in the cavernous room. He moved to stand between the two women, positioning himself slightly in front of Isabella, a human shield. It was a choice, a clear and devastating declaration of allegiance. "You need to learn your place, Amelia," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing hiss. "My place," she shot back, tears finally welling in her eyes. "My place is as your wife, as the mother of your child." Isabella smirked behind Julian's shoulder. "Looks like the little wifey has claws after all." That was it, the final provocation. Blinded by tears and a tidal wave of betrayal, Amelia lunged not at Isabella, but at Julian. She didn't know what she intended to do. Push him, hit his chest, but her action was born of pure, unadulterated pain. She never made contact. Julian reacted with startling speed. His arm shot out, and the flat of his hand connected with her cheek. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that echoed in the cathedral-like silence of the apartment. The force of it sent her stumbling backward. Her head snapped to the side, and a universe of stars exploded behind her eyes. The physical sting was immediate and searing, but it was nothing compared to the shock that paralyzed her entire body. He had hit her. Her husband, the man who had vowed to protect and cherish her, had slapped her. His pregnant wife. He had slapped her to protect his mistress. Time seemed to slow down. She could see Isabella's triumphant, vicious little smile. She could see the flicker of shock in Julian's own eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just done, quickly replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. But he wasn't going to back down. Amelia raised a trembling hand to her cheek. It was already beginning to throb. The world had tilted on its axis, and the beautiful gilded cage he had built for her was revealed for what it truly was, a prison ruled by a monster. The diamonds on the skyline outside blurred into meaningless, watery streaks. In that deafening silence, broken only by her own ragged breathing, Amelia knew with a certainty that was as painful as the blow itself that her life was over. Or rather, the life she had known was over. A new terrifying one was just beginning. The echo of the slap lingered in the air long after the sound had faded. It was a physical presence in the room, a poisonous cloud that suffocated thought and reason. Amelia stood frozen. Her mind a maelstrom of white noise and a single repeating thought. He hit me. Julian stared at his own hand, then at her. His expression a volatile cocktail of anger and a sliver of regret that was quickly being consumed by defensiveness. He had to regain control of the situation, of her, of the narrative. "Now look what you made me do," he said, his voice a low growl. It was a classic deflection, a twist of the knife that laid the blame squarely at her feet. "You were hysterical. I had to calm you down." Isabella, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. "Julian, darling, she's clearly unwell. Perhaps we should leave her be." She moved towards the door, her walk a victory parade. "Call me tomorrow. We'll finish our work at the office." She cast one last contemptuous look at Amelia before slipping out the door, clicking shut with a funereal finality. They were alone. The silence that descended was heavier, more charged than before. "Ames?" Julian began, taking a tentative step towards her. He softened his voice the way one might with a frightened animal. "Listen to me. That was unacceptable. I know that. I lost my temper. You provoked me." The words barely registered. Amelia was looking at him, but she wasn't seeing the handsome, charming man she had married. She was seeing a stranger, a violent one. The veil had been ripped away, and the man underneath was ugly and terrifying. She took a step back, her hand still pressed to her cheek. The throbbing was a constant physical reminder of his betrayal. "Don't touch me," she whispered. The words were small, but they carried the weight of a decree. "Amelia, be reasonable," he said, his tone shifting to one of weary impatience. "It's late. We're both overwrought. Let's just go to bed and we can talk about this in the morning." Talk about it, as if it were a spilled glass of wine or a forgotten appointment, as if the foundation of their entire marriage hadn't just been pulverized into dust. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked not towards their master bedroom, but towards the guest room at the far end of the sprawling apartment. She closed the door behind her, and with trembling fingers turned the lock. The click was the second most satisfying sound she had heard all night. She slid down the cool wood of the door until she was sitting on the floor, wrapping her arms around her pregnant belly in a fiercely protective gesture. The baby kicked a small, fluttering movement against her palm, as if sensing its mother's distress. And that's when the tears came. Not the hot, angry tears from before, but silent, grief-stricken sobs that racked her body. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the future she had envisioned, for the love she now knew was a lie. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of his hand, felt the impact, heard that awful sound. Sometime before dawn, a cold resolve began to crystallize in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't stay. Not one more night. Staying would mean accepting what he did. It would mean telling her unborn child that this was acceptable. It would mean her silence was his permission. As the first grey light of dawn began to seep through the blinds, Amelia rose. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She pulled a small suitcase from the closet and began to pack, her mind blessedly blank. She took only what was essential, a few changes of clothes, her toiletries, her prenatal vitamins, and a small worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a gift from her late mother. She paused at her jewelry box filled with glittering gifts from Julian, trinkets from a life that was no longer hers. She closed the lid and left them. Her final stop was her old artist's portfolio, tucked away in the back of the closet. She hadn't opened it in years, not since Julian had convinced her that her hobby was a distraction from her real job, being Mrs. Sterling. She pulled it out, the worn leather, a comforting weight in her hands. She crept out of the room. The apartment was still. She could hear Julian's faint snores coming from their bedroom. The thought of him sleeping peacefully after what he'd done sent a fresh wave of revulsion through her. She left her wedding and engagement rings on the marble kitchen island, placing them directly on top of the untouched anniversary dinner she'd so lovingly prepared. Let him find them there. A perfect, glittering tombstone for their dead marriage. She slipped out of the apartment and didn't look back. The elevator's descent from the 42nd floor felt like a journey back to Earth from a false, cold heaven. Out on the street, the morning air was crisp and cool. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, the smell of coffee and exhaust fumes in the air. It felt real, tangible in a way her life hadn't for a very long time. She hailed a cab, her voice hoarse, as she gave the driver the address. It was the only place she could think to go. An hour later, she was standing on the doorstep of a modest, cozy suburban house, the kind with a porch swing and overflowing flower pots. She rang the bell, and the door was opened by her older sister, Sophie. Sophie's cheerful morning smile vanished the moment she saw Amelia's face. She took in the swollen cheek now blooming with a faint purple bruise, the suitcase clutched in her white-knuckled grip, and the soul-deep exhaustion in her eyes. "Oh, Ames." Sophie breathed, her own eyes filling with tears. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She simply pulled her younger sister into a fierce, protective hug. Inside Sophie's warm, slightly cluttered kitchen, surrounded by the smell of brewing coffee and the comforting chaos of her sister's life. Amelia finally broke down completely. She told Sophie everything: the late nights, the perfume Isabella, the anniversary dinner, and the slap. Sophie listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to a cold, quiet rage. When Amelia was finished, her story punctuated by ragged sobs, Sophie placed a mug of chamomile tea into her trembling hands. "You're not going back, Amelia," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "You and that baby are staying here. This is your home now. We'll figure everything else out. But you are not going back to him. Ever." Amelia looked at her sister, her anchor in this storm. For the first time since the world had shattered, she felt a tiny, fragile flicker of safety. She was broken, terrified, and facing an unknown future. But she wasn't alone. The gilded cage was gone, and she was free. But freedom, she was beginning to understand, was just the first step on a long, arduous, and terrifying road. The first few weeks at Sophie's were a blur of sleep tears and quiet contemplation. The cozy guest room, with its floral wallpaper and view of a sun-drenched garden, was a sanctuary. For the first time in years, Amelia didn't have to perform. She didn't have to dress for society dinners or smile vacantly at Julian's business associates. She could just be. Pregnant, heartbroken, and scared but authentically herself. Julian predictably had tried to contact her. His initial texts were a cascade of feigned concern and veiled threats. "Amelia, where are you? This is childish. Come home. Our friends are asking questions. You're embarrassing me. If you don't come back, you will regret it. You have nothing without me." When she didn't respond, he called. Sophie answered the first time, her voice like ice. "She's safe, Julian, and she's not speaking to you. Get a lawyer." The call stopped after that, replaced by a single, chillingly formal email from a man named Arthur Thorne from the prestigious law firm Thorne and Associates, informing her that his client, Mr. Julian Sterling, would be filing for divorce. The grounds, he wrote, would be spousal abandonment and emotional instability. The words were a calculated cruelty designed to paint her as the villain. Amelia felt a surge of indignation, but it was quickly swamped by a wave of crushing despair. He was right about one thing. She had nothing. Her art history degree had gathered dust. Her savings were meager, a pittance compared to the Sterling fortune. She was pregnant, unemployed, and about to be embroiled in a divorce with a man who had unlimited resources to crush her. She and Sophie spent hours discussing options. Amelia could fight for alimony for child support, but Julian would drag it out, bleed her dry in legal fees, and slander her name in the process. The prospect was daunting, almost paralyzing. It was on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, about a month after she'd left, that the letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to Sophie's house, but had been forwarded from the Bristol apartment. The envelope was thick, expensive, cream-colored cardstock with a return address that made Amelia's breath catch in her throat. The estate of Beatrice Sterling. Beatrice Sterling was Julian's paternal grandmother, the formidable matriarch of the Sterling family. She was a woman carved from granite and diamonds who had inherited the family's modest shipping company in the 1960s and through sheer force of will and brilliant business acumen built it into the global behemoth of Sterling Enterprises. Julian was terrified of her. She had a gaze that could dissect a person's character in seconds, and she suffered no fools. Amelia had only met her a handful of times. The old woman was mostly reclusive, living on her vast historic estate in the countryside. But in their few brief conversations, Beatrice had looked at Amelia with a surprising kindness, an almost conspiratorial glint in her sharp grey eyes. "You have a spine, child," she'd once said, after Amelia had gently contradicted Julian on a point of art history. "Don't ever let him convince you otherwise." Her hands trembling. Amelia opened the letter. It was from Beatrice's personal solicitor, a Mr. Alistair Finch, requesting her presence for a private reading of a codicil to Mrs. Sterling's last will and testament. Beatrice had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days prior. Amelia stared at the letter confused. Why would she be included in Beatrice's will? She was an outcast, the soon-to-be ex-wife of a grandson Beatrice had always seemed to regard with a cool disappointment. "You have to go," Sophie insisted, reading the letter over her shoulder. "What if she left you a small token, a piece of jewelry? Anything could help right now." A week later, Amelia found herself walking up the gravel path to a stately old-world law office in the city's financial district. She wore her only nice maternity dress, feeling self-conscious and out of place. Mr. Finch was a kind, elderly gentleman with a shock of white hair and compassionate eyes. He greeted her warmly and led her into a book-lined office that smelled of old paper and leather. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, then corrected himself. My apologies. Miss Davies, is it? Or do you prefer Amelia? Amelia is fine, she said softly. Amelia. He nodded. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I know this must be a confusing time. Beatrice was a very particular woman. She knew her own mind, and she was an impeccable judge of character. He retrieved a sealed envelope from a locked drawer in his mahogany desk. Beatrice amended her will just 2 months ago. She was very specific that this particular codicil be read to you, and you alone, before the main will is read to the rest of the family next week. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the document, clearing his throat, before he began to read. The legal language was dense, but the gist of it slowly began to dawn on Amelia, piece by unbelievable piece. Beatrice Sterling, in her infinite and inscrutable wisdom, had established a blind trust years ago. Into this trust she had quietly funneled a significant portion of her personal non-corporate assets. Blue-chip stocks, real estate holdings in London and Geneva, a considerable art collection, and a vast portfolio of liquid assets. It was a fortune entirely separate from Sterling Enterprises, a secret nest egg unknown to the rest of her family, including Julian. The codicil was simple and direct. The sole beneficiary of this trust upon Beatrice's death was to be Amelia Davies. Amelia's mind went blank. The room seemed to tilt. I don't understand, she stammered. Why? Mr. Finch smiled gently. Beatrice didn't just leave you a document, my dear. She also left you a letter. He handed her a second, smaller envelope, this one in Beatrice's spidery, elegant handwriting. Amelia's fingers shook as she opened it. My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I trust Alistair has explained the situation. I imagine you are quite shocked. Do not be. I may be old, but my eyes have always been sharp. I have watched my grandson for 34 years. I have seen the boy he was, and I have seen the man he has become, a man driven by greed and ego, a hollow imitation of his grandfather's strength. I saw the way he looked at you not as a partner, but as a beautiful acquisition. And I saw the way you looked at him with a love he neither deserved nor appreciated. I always hoped you would find your strength and leave him. I suspect that by now you have. He will have hurt you. Men like Julian always do. They cannot stand the light in others, because it exposes their own darkness. This money is not a gift, Amelia. It is ammunition. It is a shield. It is your independence. He will try to take everything from you in the divorce. He will try to paint you as a mad woman, a gold digger. He will try to crush you. Do not let him. Use this to fight. Use this to build a life for yourself and for my great-grandchild, the only Sterling legacy I have any faith in. You have a spine, child. I told you that once. Now is the time to use it. Make him regret the day he ever underestimated you. With deepest affection, Beatrice. A single tear traced a path down Amelia's cheek, dripping onto the expensive paper. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming, bone-deep gratitude. Beatrice had seen her. In a world where she had felt invisible, this formidable woman had seen her, believed in her, and from beyond the grave had handed her a sword and shield. The total value of the trust, Mr. Finch said softly, as if sensing her turmoil, is in the region of £95 million. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't even seem real. It was more than enough to live on. It was enough to fight with. It was more than enough to win. Amelia looked up from the letter, her eyes no longer filled with fear, but with a new hard light. A faint glimmer of hope had just become a blazing sun. Julian thought she was a broken, penniless victim. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The game had changed, and Amelia was finally ready to play. The 3 months that followed were a period of radical transformation for Amelia. The initial shock of her inheritance gave way to a quiet, focused determination. Beatrice's letter became her mantra, her declaration of independence. She read it every morning, drawing strength from the old woman's fierce belief in her. Her first act was to move out of Sophie's guest room. While she was eternally grateful for her sister's sanctuary, she needed her own space to think, to plan, and to grow. With Mr. Finch's assistance, she leased a discreet but elegant townhouse in a quiet, leafy suburb, miles away from the cold glass tower she once called home. It had a small garden in the back and a large sunlit room that she immediately designated as a nursery, and for now her personal studio. Her second act was to hire the best legal counsel money could buy. She didn't go to a flashy high-profile firm that would attract media attention. Instead, on Mr. Finch's recommendation, she secured the services of Catherine Davies, a brilliant and notoriously tenacious family law solicitor, known for her razor-sharp intellect and her unwavering dedication to her clients. Ms. Davies was a woman in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. In their first meeting, Amelia laid out the entire story, leaving out no detail from Julian's growing coldness to the final violent confrontation with Isabella. She presented the divorce papers filed by Julian's lawyer, Arthur Thorne, which painted her as an unstable gold digger. Ms. Davies listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Amelia was finished, the lawyer leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Thorne is a formidable opponent," she said, her voice calm and measured. "He plays dirty. His strategy will be to assassinate your character, to make you seem so unreasonable that any judge would dismiss your claims. Julian Sterling has the family name, the money, the power. In the court of public opinion, you are already at a disadvantage." "I know," Amelia said, her voice steady. "But he doesn't know about my changed circumstances." She slid a summary of the trust prepared by Mr. Finch across the polished table. Miss Davies picked it up, her eyebrows rising slightly as she scanned the figures. A slow, thin smile touched her lips. "I see," she said. "This is no longer a divorce case, Amelia. This is a corporate takeover enacted through family law. This changes everything." The strategy they devised was one of meticulous preparation and absolute secrecy. The existence of the inheritance was to be their trump card, their ace in the hole to be played only at the most opportune moment in court. In the meantime, they would let Julian and his lawyer believe they were fighting a frightened, penniless woman. Ms. Davies filed a countersuit. She didn't contest the divorce, but she aggressively challenged the grounds. Her filing cited Julian's adultery, and to Julian's shock and fury, extreme cruelty, requesting a restraining order that legally barred him from contacting Amelia directly. The battle lines were drawn. While the lawyers exchanged venomous letters, Amelia focused on rebuilding herself. She started by unearthing the woman she had been before Julian Sterling had remolded her into his perfect passive wife. She enrolled in business and finance courses online, determined to understand the intricacies of the fortune Beatrice had left her. She spent hours poring over market reports and investment strategies, her mind once soft with art history, becoming sharp and analytical. She also began to draw again. She retrieved her old portfolio and set up an easel in the sunlit studio. At first, her hands felt clumsy. the connection between her mind's eye and the charcoal on the page broken. But slowly it returned. She didn't draw landscapes or still lifes. She drew her emotions. She sketched Julian's face twisted in a mask of cold fury. She drew Isabella a coiled serpent in a crimson dress, and she drew herself over and over each time a little stronger. Her jaw set her eyes looking forward. Her pregnancy progressed, her body changing day by day. The growing life within her was a constant, powerful motivator. Every legal document she read, every financial statement she analyzed, every protective measure she put in place she did for her child. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting to build a fortress to protect her baby from the legacy of its father. Meanwhile, Julian was living a life of arrogant self-assurance. With Beatrice gone, he felt untouchable. He had successfully petitioned the board to be named interim CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a position he was confident would become permanent. He and Isabella were now a public couple, appearing at charity galas and society events, a portrait of power and success. Isabella had moved into the Bristol apartment, her clothes now filling the closet Amelia had so hastily emptied. Julian viewed the divorce as a mere annoyance, a piece of corporate housekeeping. He instructed his lawyer, Mr. Thorne, to offer Amelia a ridiculously low settlement, a one-time payment of £50,000, and a gag order forbidding her from ever speaking about their marriage. "She'll take it," Julian had said to Thorne over drinks at their exclusive club. "She's got nothing. She's living with her school-teacher sister in some dreary suburb. She can't afford a protracted fight. We'll starve her out." Thorne, a portly man with a smug demeanor, had readily agreed. "We'll bury her in paperwork, my boy. By the time we get to court, she'll be begging to sign." Amelia, through Miss Davies, flatly refused the offer without a counter. This puzzled Thorne and infuriated Julian. Her silence was unnerving. They had expected hysterics, desperate phone calls, pleading. They got nothing but a wall of professional, unyielding silence from her lawyer. "What is she playing at?" Julian had raged. "Who does she think she is?" He couldn't comprehend that the woman he had dismissed as a fragile, decorative object had her own resources, her own strategy. He was so blinded by his own ego and his perception of her weakness that he couldn't see the trap being laid for him. He saw the meek lamb he had married, not the lioness she was becoming. The preliminary court date was set. As the day approached, Amelia felt a tremor of her old fear return. It was one thing to prepare for battle from the safety of her new home, another entirely to face him in person. The night before the hearing, Sophie came over. She found Amelia in the nursery, assembling a crib, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Nervous?" Sophie asked gently. Amelia tightened a final screw and straightened up, placing a hand on her large, round belly. "Terrified," she admitted. "When I see him, I'm afraid I'll just crumble. That I'll be that woman again, the one who stood there and let him hit her." Sophie took her sister's hands. "That woman is gone, Ames. He destroyed her. Look at you. You've built a new life in 3 months. You've educated yourself. You're preparing to fight a titan. You are not the person who left his apartment that morning. You are wearing a new armor. He just can't see it yet." Amelia looked around the peaceful room at the crib she had built with her own hands and felt the baby kick. Sophie was right. This was real. Her strength was real. The armor was real. And tomorrow, Julian Sterling would finally see what he was up against. The family court was located in a soulless modern building, all polished granite and muted grey tones, designed to project an air of solemn impartiality. But for Amelia, the place felt charged with a suffocating tension. This was the arena where her future and the future of her child would be decided. She walked in, flanked by Miss Davies, her expression carefully neutral. She had chosen her outfit with deliberation, a simple dark blue maternity dress that was professional and modest. It was her armor, as Sophie had called it. She ignored the whispers from the handful of journalists gathered outside their presence, undoubtedly tipped off by Julian's PR team. Julian was already there, holding court with his lawyer Arthur Thorne. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Amelia's first car. He caught her eye across the crowded waiting area and gave her a look of pure condescension, a slight smirk playing on his lips as his gaze swept over her pregnant form. It was a look that said, "You are nothing without me." Isabella was not present. Thorne had likely advised that her presence would be inflammatory. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even more sterile. The judge, a woman named Annette Morrison, with a reputation for being sharp and fair, entered and the proceedings began. Arthur Thorne spoke first. His voice was smooth and sonorous, filling the room with an air of practiced authority. He began by painting a picture of Julian as a dedicated, hard-working husband, burdened by the immense pressures of running a global empire, who had been tragically betrayed by an emotionally volatile and demanding wife. "Mr. Sterling, by his own admission, is not a perfect man," Thorne said, pacing slowly before the judge. "He works long hours. His mind is often preoccupied with the livelihoods of the thousands of employees at Sterling Enterprises. Perhaps he was not always as emotionally available as his wife would have liked." He gestured towards Amelia. But what he was met with was not understanding but constant suspicion and jealousy, accusations, hysteria. It culminated on the night of their 5th anniversary, when Mrs. Sterling, in a fit of baseless rage, physically assaulted my client. A low gasp went through the small public gallery. Amelia felt her blood run cold. He was twisting the story, turning her desperate, pained lunge into a premeditated attack. "My client," Thorne continued, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "merely raised his hands to defend himself from her flailing attack. If his hand made contact with her face, it was purely accidental, a reflexive action to protect himself. And what was Mrs. Sterling's response to this unfortunate incident? She abandoned the marital home. She cut off all contact, refusing even to tell her worried husband where she was. She has shown herself to be unstable, erratic, and vindictive." He then moved on to the finances, presenting Julian's version of their assets. He portrayed Amelia as having contributed nothing to the marital wealth, a dependent who had enjoyed a life of extreme luxury, thanks solely to Julian's hard work. "And now," Thorne boomed, his voice rising in righteous indignation, "she comes to this court with outrageous demands. She seeks to punish Mr. Sterling for her own instability. She is not seeking a fair settlement. She is seeking a lottery win. It is a clear and transparent case of greed, a classic gold digger, Your Honor." He sat down, looking smugly satisfied. The narrative was set. Julian was the long-suffering victim, and Amelia was the unhinged, greedy villain. Amelia could feel the weight of the judge's gaze on her, assessing, questioning. She kept her eyes fixed forward, her hands clasped tightly over her baby bump, trying to control her breathing. Every word Thorne had spoken was a lie, a distortion, a poisoned dart. And it was working. She could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting against her. Then it was Miss Davies's turn. She rose, not with Thorn's theatricality, but with a quiet, steely composure. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "Mr. Thorn has painted a very compelling piece of fiction. I am here today to present the facts." She started by methodically dismantling the character assassination. She produced phone records showing dozens of unanswered calls and texts from Amelia to Julian in the months leading up to their separation, evidence of her attempts to communicate, not his. She presented a sworn affidavit from the couple's former housekeeper, who testified to Julian's increasingly frequent late-night returns and his cold, dismissive treatment of his wife. "Mr. Thorn claims my client is unstable," Ms. Davies said, her voice sharp. "I would argue that any woman who discovers her husband is engaged in a long-term affair might be expected to show some emotional distress. The colleague my client's husband brought home on their anniversary was in fact his mistress, Ms. Isabella Vance, a woman with whom he is now in a public relationship." She slid a file of photographs across to the Clark tabloid pictures of Julian and Isabella at recent events, looking very much like a couple. A flicker of annoyance crossed Judge Morrison's face as she looked at them. Ms. Davies then addressed the night of the slap. "Mr. Thorn describes a flailing attack. What he fails to mention is that my client is 5 months pregnant. He describes my client's departure as abandonment. I would describe it as fleeing a situation that had become not just emotionally but physically abusive." Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Thorn whispered something to him, but Julian waved him away, his jaw tight with anger. "As for the finances," Ms. Davies continued, "Mr. Thorn is correct that my client put her career on hold to support her husband. She managed their homes, organized the social events crucial to his career, and was preparing to be the mother of his heir. A role, I might add, that the Sterling family has historically valued very highly." Despite Ms. Davies's sharp rebuttal, Amelia could sense they were only holding their ground, not gaining it. Thorn's initial portrayal of her had been powerful. The narrative of the scorned, hysterical wife was an old and sadly effective one. The judge looked thoughtful but not yet convinced. They needed something more. They needed to shatter the image of Julian as the untouchable provider and Amelia as the desperate dependent. Thorn, sensing he still had the upper hand, rose for his final remarks for the day. "Your Honor, this is all smoke and mirrors. The fact remains that Mrs. Sterling, or Miss Davies, as she now prefers, has no resources of her own. She is entirely dependent on the court's charity and her husband's generosity, a generosity she has repaid with slander and vitriol. We ask that you dismiss her outlandish claims and proceed on the grounds we have filed." He sat down, a triumphant smirk on his face. The day was ending, and he believed he had won. He had framed the entire conflict around money and Amelia's supposed lack of it. It was the central pillar of his argument. She was desperate, and therefore she was lying. Judge Morrison looked from Thorn to Ms. Davies. "Do you have anything further for today, Ms. Davies?" Amelia held her breath. She looked at her lawyer, who met her gaze with a look of calm resolve. Ms. Davies had one more card to play for the day, a small one. But it was designed to unsettle their opponents and lay the groundwork for the real explosion to come. "Just one point of clarification." "Your Honor," Ms. Davies said, her voice ringing with clarity. "Mr. Thorn repeatedly bases his entire argument on the premise that my client, Amelia Davies, is a woman of no personal means. He uses her supposed financial desperation as a motive for her alleged slander and greed." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "For the record, Your Honor, and for Mr. Thorn's edification, I would just like to state that this premise is demonstrably and fundamentally false." A confused murmur went through the room. Thorne looked baffled. Julian frowned, whispering to his lawyer. "What is she talking about?" Judge Morrison leaned forward, intrigued. "Explain yourself, Miss Davies." "That will be all for today, Your Honor," Miss Davies said with a slight, mysterious smile. "But I assure you at our next session we will be explaining it in considerable detail." She sat down, leaving a wake of confusion and suspense. The pillar of Thorne's argument had just been publicly challenged. A tiny crack had appeared in their case. Julian stared at Amelia. His eyes narrowed in suspicion, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time all day, his mask of smug confidence had slipped. He was no longer in complete control, and he didn't like it one bit. The week between court sessions was agony for Julian. Ms. Davies's cryptic statement, demonstrably and fundamentally false, had unnerved him. After his investigators found no assets to Amelia's name, he dismissed it as a desperate bluff. He arrived at the next session, radiating arrogance, ready to crush this final pathetic attempt at resistance. The courtroom hummed with anticipation. Julian's lawyer, Arthur Thorne, immediately went on the offensive. "Your Honor," he began with a sneer, opposing counsel made a rather theatrical claim regarding her client's financial status, for which she has provided no evidence. "We ask that she either substantiate this fantasy or withdraw it." Judge Morrison turned her sharp gaze to Ms. Davies. "The floor is yours, counsel. The court is waiting." Ms. Davies rose with quiet confidence, placing a heavy leather briefcase on her table. "I have no intention of withdrawing my statement, Your Honor. I intend to prove it." She looked directly at Julian, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Sterling operates under the delusion that his wealth makes him omniscient. He is about to learn how wrong he is." From her briefcase, she pulled a thick, bound document. "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Exhibit A, a certified copy of the last will and testament of the late Beatrice Sterling." A shocked silence fell. Julian shot Thorne a bewildered look. What could his grandmother's will possibly have to do with this? Thorne, flustered, jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings." "On the contrary," Ms. Davies countered calmly. "It is the single most relevant fact in this entire case. Beatrice Sterling was a wise woman. She understood the character of her grandson, and she took steps to protect her legacy from him. She let her words hang in the air before delivering the first blow. In a codicil signed 8 weeks before her death, Beatrice Sterling amended the terms of the Sterling Family Heritage Trust. She has in fact disinherited her grandson Julian Sterling from his controlling interest." The room erupted in gasps. The blood drained from Julian's face. "That's a lie," he shouted, leaping from his chair. "Mr. Sterling, control yourself," the judge snapped. Thorne was frantically reading his copy, his face pale with disbelief. But Ms. Davies wasn't finished. "Beatrice didn't just disinherit Julian," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "She reassigned the primary beneficiary. The controlling shares of Sterling Enterprises, the chairmanship of the board, the entire Sterling fortune. She left it all to one person." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Julian's horrified face before landing on Amelia. "She left it all," Miss Davies declared, "to Amelia Davies and to her now unborn child." The courtroom exploded. Julian stared, his mouth agape, his world completely shattered. He looked at the quiet, timid woman he had discarded and saw for the first time a queen on her throne. "Impossible," Thorne stammered. "It's a forgery. She manipulated a senile old woman, Beatrice Sterling was as sharp as a tack until the day she died, Ms. Davies retorted, producing another document. And she anticipated this accusation. Your Honor, I present Exhibit B, a personal letter from Beatrice, to be read in open court, should her will be challenged. Given permission by the judge, Ms. Davies began to read Beatrice's fierce, elegant words aloud. If this letter is being read, it means my grandson Julian is behaving precisely as I predicted, like a spoiled child. Let me be clear. My mind is sound. My decision is final. I have watched Julian place ego before honor and profit before integrity. He is a poor steward of the Sterling name. The letter continued, each word a hammer blow to Julian's character. Miss Davies's voice was steady as she read the final devastating lines. The final proof of his defective character was his treatment of his wife Amelia, a woman of more substance and fortitude than he possesses in his entire body. I am entrusting my fortune to her, and to my great-grandchild. I am ensuring my company is led by someone with integrity, not by a philandering bully who would strike his own pregnant wife to protect his mistress. The final line landed in a dead, horrified silence. The judge stared at Julian with utter contempt. His entire case, his reputation, and his identity had been obliterated by the truth. The court had gasped, the trap had been sprung, and the unveiling was complete. Julian Sterling was a king no more. The fallout from the courtroom unveiling was immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The judge, disgusted by Beatrice's letter and Julian's clear dishonesty, granted the divorce on Amelia's terms, making the restraining order permanent. The story became a media sensation, painting Julian as a violent, disgraced fool. Acting on the will's undeniable authority, the board of Sterling Enterprises convened an emergency meeting and stripped him of his CEO title and board seat within 24 hours. Isabella Vance, seeing her powerful lover reduced to a penniless pariah, vanished from his life without a backward glance. Julian was left a ghost, haunting the ruins of a life he had destroyed. Amelia, in stark contrast, handled her new reality with quiet grace and steel. She formally accepted her position as chairwoman of the board, but eschewed the lavish lifestyle it afforded. Instead of moving into a grand estate, she remained in her modest townhouse, a place of genuine warmth and safety. Her first act was not a corporate purge, but the establishment of a multi-million-dollar foundation, funded by company profits, dedicated to supporting shelters for women and children fleeing domestic violence. It was a clear, powerful statement of her new purpose. 2 months after the court case concluded, Amelia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Beatrice. Holding her daughter in the quiet hospital room, Amelia felt a sense of peace that washed away the last vestiges of her pain. All the betrayal and fear had led to this perfect tiny person, who was her future. Her first board meeting as chairwoman was 3 weeks later. She walked into the intimidating wood-paneled boardroom, not in a power suit, but in a simple dress, with her daughter sleeping peacefully in a carrier against her chest. The collection of grey-haired men seated around the table stared stunned into silence. Amelia took her rightful seat at the head of the table. Looking at each of them, her gaze steady, she began. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Beatrice Sterling entrusted me with the future of this company, and I will not let her down. Our focus from this day forward will be on integrity and responsibility. We will be a company that builds not one, that bullies." In that moment, she had completed her transformation. She was not Julian Sterling's ex-wife or a surprise heiress. She was Amelia Davies, a mother, a survivor, and the new matriarch of Sterling Enterprises, ready to build a better world for her daughter a future that was truly sterling. Amelia's journey is a powerful testament to the incredible strength that can be found in the darkest of times. It's a story about how the deepest betrayals can sometimes become the catalyst for our greatest transformations. She went from being a victim in a gilded cage to the master of her own destiny, proving that true power isn't about the money you have, but the character you show when you have nothing. Her story reminds us that integrity, courage, and a mother's fierce love are forces more powerful than any corporate emperor or cruel man. She didn't just win a divorce, she won back her soul and built a better future from the ashes of her past. What did you think of Amelia's incredible transformation? Have you ever witnessed someone turn a moment of complete devastation into their ultimate victory? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and inspiring stories of resilience.